Hello again, and welcome to my series on patching the generative Polykrell. Last time around we were looking at how I've managed to use my case full of Doepfer poly modules to add a 4-voice, fully polyphonic backing kind of string part to our ongoing Krellberg patch. And so we're just looking at how I've bussed the 4 1 volt per octave note CVs that are coming from the Sketchy Labs analog shift registers, and it's a pair of them that I'm using clocked from a Triggerman interface, and then they come out of the other side of the Doepfer networking cable busing module, and that's these 4 cables there, and then they head into and then they head here, and they're bussed into the, they're impossible to see, but down in there is a couple of buffed mults that normally would take the 4 CV signals from the Doepfer MIDI to CV interface, and you can see I've color-coded them using some fancy pipe cleaners. And I simply pulled those out of there, patched in my CVs from the analog shift registers, and now I'm controlling the polyphonic system with gates and CV. Now the polyphonic system's gates that come from the Triggerman all the way over here and so there's our Triggerman. I'm just going to zip back up and we'll see some of the gates. There's one of the gates for channel 3. So then that string of gates opens up a high gate that stays high for all those trigger steps, and then that's controlling voice 3 on the polyphonic module. Now looking at the scopes that I've got set up, we're actually seeing some of this. So the middle VU is still the voltage output from the Pittsburgh 8-step sequencer, and that's what's running much of our patch in terms of tempo. So it's controlling the rate of the 5 Polykrell envelopes. It's adding in a bias voltage to the quantizer, so it's moving the pitched output up and down, and it's also patched in to the CV in on the Triggerman, because lo and behold, there's a mode in the Triggerman where you can voltage control its clock rate. So I set it to its slowest clock rate, and then I'm using that bias voltage from the Pittsburgh sequencer to speed up that clock. And so every once in a while, when the VU starts to rise like it is now on the Doepfer VU, that means our Pittsburgh voltage is up, and then these clocks will run quicker. So that means the triggers to the Sketchy Labs analog shift registers are updating faster, so we're getting more notes into the Doepfer poly system, and it means that these gates are coming at us faster, and they're going to be shorter. Now we can see those gates if we look at the far right blue scope. Whenever that line is high, and we'll see like little, I think we're seeing 3 little short gates now. That means that the gates are shorter, and then as those lines get longer, that means that the gates are longer. Now, unlike a regular Krell envelope, the Doepfer polyphonic system uses a typical ADSR, although it is voltage controllable. So I've got a little bit of sustain going on. So those voices will attack, decay, then sustain, and then release. Now we can see now the VU meter on the A197 analog meter is dropped down, and the length of the gates from the trigger man have now gotten longer again in our ED701 miniscope. So we can also see the envelopes coming out of the Doepfer. I've patched in the envelope that controls filter number 2 in the Doepfer polysynth, and I've patched in channels 1 and channel 3, and we see them on the scope as the red and the green. So they're typical ADSR envelopes, but they're also making some slight changes as they play, simply because I couldn't resist. Given that they're voltage controlled envelopes, I got really curious about what would happen if I had these 4 envelopes playing regular kinds of ADSR envelopes, but then I started changing their shapes using some of the voltages that are being bussed around in the Krellberg patch. And so here's how I did that. Well, I hope that you've liked what you've seen and heard so far in our crazy giant Polykrell. I would certainly appreciate a like, a subscribe, and join up to my Patreon. Thank you so much, and we will see you next time.